Hey everyone, my name's Benjamin, and welcome to my book club. Today, I'm really excited. We get to talk about my favourite mathematics textbook I've ever read. Greg Egan is just built differently, I think. He's a mathematician, he's a former computer programmer, and those aspects really shine through in his work. I've only read one other Greg Egan book before. It was a collection of his short stories, ℚ𝕚𝕚𝕚𝕚, which I thought was just amazing. In short form, the science and the maths in each story was just so tight and enjoyable, and just completely blew my mind with some of the concepts he was going for. So I went out and picked up a few of his novels, and this, Diaspora, is the first of those novels that I've read. And oh boy, does this have some maths in it. If you're scared off by mathematics, then I'm going to have some advice for you a little bit later in the video. But just suffice to say, be warned. This is dense. Just a quick example of the sort of thing that we're dealing with. This is just right at the start of the book, completely out of context, so there's no spoilers. But just one of the sort of bits that got me to stop and be like, oh, really early on. And I'm paraphrasing. The torus appeared to have been transformed into a short cylindrical band. The large blue circles of latitude were all of equal size now, but the smaller red circles, the meridians, looked like they'd been flattened into straight lines. I've rotated each meridian 90 degrees into a fourth spatial dimension. They only look flat because we're seeing them edge on. Taking the band between a pair of concentric circles, twisting it 90 degrees out of plane, standing on its edge, the extra dimension created room for the entire band to have a uniform radius. With the torus it was much the same. Every circle of latitude could have the same radius, as long as they were given different heights in a fourth dimension to keep them apart. So immediately, right at the start of the book, it asks me to imagine shapes being rotated into a fourth dimension, and that's just the first of the extra dimensions the book expects me to kind of get my head around. We start looking at fifth dimensions and like a 5 spatial dimensions plus 1 time dimension, and how shapes work in that, and non-Euclidean geometry, and... But don't fear, says the internet. I googled, for other people having issues with this book, and someone said, don't worry, Greg Egan has a website. And on that website, he has explanations of some of the stuff that goes on in his book. And I think, thank God. That's going to really help me out. I'm going to go here, he's going to kind of break it down a bit more, and help me understand what the characters are doing in this book. And that's when I discover that I've been hoodwinked. This is not a website for people who are struggling with the math in his book. This is a website for people who read this book and went, there wasn't enough maths here for me. Because this website looks like this. And it's just more maths. It's exploring these concepts, but for mathematicians. And it is absolutely no help if you don't understand what's already going on in here. But during this time, I found a piece of advice that unlocked this book for me. And I'm going to share it with you because I think it's very important. The advice is to treat the science and the maths as you would treat, for example, a magic system in a fantasy book. You don't need to know exactly how a wizard conjures a fireball. You just need to know that a wizard can conjure a fireball. You don't need to know how a character in here rotates a sphere into the fourth dimension. You just need to know that they can. And it's nice that the explanations are in here, because sometimes you kind of grasp it a little bit. But overall, if you just accept that the science and the math, whether it's correct or not in the real world, is correct in the world of the book, and just works for the characters the way that it should, then yeah, treat it like a science, treat it like a magic system, and it just unlocks the book, and it becomes such a fantastic novel. The story in this book is about humanity at its core, and humanity in the far future, and we have evolved into several different varieties of humanity over time. We have the fleshers who still live on Earth in flesh and blood bodies, but almost none of them still closely resemble what we would think of as humanity. And those that do are kind of ridiculed for it. Most fleshers have begun to evolve themselves physically, gills, wings, or mentally in different thought processes and different ways to compartmentalize their knowledge and their memories and their computing power of their brain. And the differences between these groups of humans mean that sometimes communication between them can be almost impossible. Then we have the humans who live in the polises. They are simulated intelligence, simulated humanity. A lot of them originally humans whose brains were scanned and uploaded a long time ago. But now in this simulated reality, they can have children by creating new versions of themselves, creating new unique intelligences within the policies. And there's many different policies, some of which view the real world and reality as just obsolete. We don't need to worry about that. We can do whatever we want in our simulated realities, and we can make whatever world we want. And others view that their creations are only valid in the scope of the real world. It is the real world that has all this massive scale and beauty, and that with their, almost unlimited lifespans as simulated creatures, it is their job and duty to explore this. And then between the two sits the ℓ𝕚𝕚𝕚, which is a fantastic name, which are robotic bodies in the real world with simulated minds controlling them. So they are simulated artificial intelligences or humans that have been brain scanned, but they exist in the real world instead of in simulated world, and they exist in robotic bodies. And the name ℓ𝕚𝕚𝕚 is so fantastic because I believe it's German for hypocrite. So while the fleshers think that the people that live in simulated worlds are weird for not wanting to be in the real world, and the simulated people think that the fleshers are risky and ridiculous for wanting to stay in real flesh and blood bodies, they both view the ℓ𝕚𝕚𝕚 as hypocrites. They're simulated, and yet they're existing in the real world, and so they don't get the best of both sides, they get the worst. And the differences between these groups are really explored really interestingly, and I'd love some more stuff in this world during that period of the book that just explores those dynamics between them, because it's so fascinating. The main plot of the book, however, is to do with a kind of like an out-of-scope problem, an issue of galactic import that has implications for all of these people, and how humanity as a whole kind of comes together to deal with it. Look, I'll just jump into the stuff I liked first off. Right away, the plot, the mystery, it's just stellar, and the pun is very much intended. The scale of the story is amazing. I love huge scale that's in my space stories, and this one absolutely captures that. It has thrilling and enticing moments all the way through. It often left me thinking and wondering and tense. Our main characters are essentially AIs, but it's a book where, unlike other books where your main character would be an AI, and that would be the story, it would be an AI story. This is not a story about AIs. This is a story that features AIs as our main characters. They're characters just like they would be if they were humans. We explore the implications of being an AI, but the fact that they're AIs is not the core part of the story. The focus of the story is on the mission to prevent the sort of disasters that could wipe out humanity. And it's explored through scientific means and experiments and exploration and discussions and debates and mathematics, a lot of mathematics, and I was wrapped and engaged start to finish. The book examines something that I think is really interesting, which is if you are immortal or you have an exceptionally long lifespan, the sort of problems you have to deal with and think about are completely different. If you live 80 to 100 years, the idea of a completely, not in the book, complete example, the idea of a rogue planet entering the solar system, disrupting planetary orbits, and causing problems for humanity. That's just so impossible, so unlikely, almost zero chance. It's not something you need to worry about. But if you live for 4 billion years or more, then that's a problem that's going to happen, In the infiniteness of space, everything can happen and everything will happen. So that's the sort of problem. You need to have a solution for that because it will happen at some point. As time expands, the probability of all events increase rather than decrease. I don't know. I'm not a scientist, and I think that shows. But it gets explored in this book in a way that's really satisfying. I want to highlight one particular part of the book is just fantastic, and luckily it's the first chapter. The first chapter is this story of a consciousness coming into being and figuring out its place in the world. And it's a view of life and thinking and knowledge that I haven't seen expressed this wonderfully. And you don't have to buy the book to read it. Greg Egan has this entire chapter on his website, which I will link in the description below. I'm not certain that it's one-to-one to the book. I had a quick scan. I looked at the start, the middle, the finish, and it looked like it matched the book to me, but I didn't read it again on the website. But I really suggest checking it out. If you think this book might be interesting to you, or even if you don't think this book would be interesting to you, it's one chapter, it's free on the internet, check it out. If you like it, you're probably going to like the book. And as I said, it's just the exploration of consciousness in this one is just mind-blowing and so enjoyable to read. Next up is the maths. As I said, there's a lot of it, and it can be completely impenetrable at times. But it all seems like it was worth it when you get to the end. It really does work towards building the plot, and it is the way these characters would talk and act and think and resolve these issues. And while for most of it, I was following along with that advice, treat it like a magic system. I don't need to know how it works, I just know that it does. There was occasionally bits where we brushed on topics that I did know a little bit about. I am kind of a space nerd. I watch a lot of this sort of stuff on YouTube, so I'm by no ways an expert, but some of this stuff I recognised and understood, and that's very satisfying. The elation and stroking of my ego is very nice in those moments. Look, there's a lot of scary math in like the first 2 or 3 chapters. After that, it kind of takes a back seat for quite a while. And then there's some, again, as we approach the end of the book, but it's not nearly as off-putting by that point because we know the characters. I would say if you're reading this and struggling, which is what I did, get past those first 3 chapters and you're fine. Those first 3 chapters are great. They're just kind of scary with the maths. I will mention that after chapter 2, I was struggling and I Googled around for some help with, is this book too hard for me to read? And I found this blog written by Josh Archer where he posts the notes that he took during the book, which he separated into chapters, and they really helped, actually. I'd get to the end of the chapter and I didn't make my own notes, but I'd get through a chapter and then I'd check his notes and confirm that what I thought was happening. Or maybe he had a different view on a couple things, and that was really enjoyable. So if you do find yourself struggling, I recommend checking out Josh's page. I will also have that one linked in the description below. And just remember, you don't need to understand these concepts. You don't need to grasp the non-Euclidean geometry these characters talk about at times to enjoy the book. If you just skimmed over all the math in this book, you would still find it enjoyable. You would still love it just as much as I did, I think. And finally, the ending. The entire last section of the book, the last third or so, is just fantastic. It brings all the mysteries and questions I had together satisfyingly. Our character arcs all wrap up in ways that make sense. All the way until the end, I was really enjoying myself, and the ending is just one of the best endings I've read in sci-fi in a long time. It's beautiful. So what didn't I like then? Honestly, not much. The characters can be a bit flat, considering how advanced they are and maybe how complex they should be. Some of them aren't. But that's okay. I think this is the sort of book where the plot and the concepts of the story really take center stage more than the characters. Similar to Three Body Problem, where the characters are very flat and kind of dull and two-dimensional, but it doesn't matter because the events that are taking place are so interesting, and the characters are kind of just our viewpoint into that. I think the characters in this one may be a bit better than the ones in that one. But they're not fantastic. As I mentioned, the mathematics can be very off-putting. I did deal with it, but if I hadn't found that advice to kind of treat it like something that doesn't really matter that much, then I might have given up on the book. It was real slow going for that first couple of chapters. A lot of reading a page, putting it down, and being like, okay, a triangle is what? But once I got past that, it was fine. Oh, and my biggest issue is with the formatting. Look, maybe this is my fault. There's a contents page at the start, but it gives away the chapter names, so I don't like that. I don't read that, because, chapter names can often be spoilers. But if I had read that, I would have found out that there's a glossary at the back of the book. If the glossary was at the front of the book, or if it was more obvious that there was a glossary, that would have made the book so much easier. There were some terms and stuff in the book that I just took for granted. Kind of like when reading Netrunner or something like that, you just get dropped into the world and you just accept these terms and they never get explained. But there were quite a few of them in this book, and if I'd known there was a glossary in the back I could flip to, that would have made it so much easier. I wish it was more obvious there was a glossary, so that's my recommendation. Make sure you know there's a glossary in this book and make use of it. There you have it. As for final thoughts, I loved this book. I loved Greg Egan. Everything I've read from him so far has been amazing. I have Permutation City sitting on my shelf, which I will read very soon. And then I think I'm going to pick up the rest of his books as well. He seems to just click into that sort of high concept sci-fi that just breaks my mind in half, and I love. I undenied between a 9 and a 10 for this book. The concepts and the plot are a 10. I love that stuff. But maybe the characters and maybe a bit of the impenetrability of the book knocks it down a bit. So I think I am going to give it a 9 out of 10. Which, considering anything above a 5, I think is good in a suggestion. A 9 out of 10. This book is fantastic, and I do really recommend you check it out. And if you want to pick up a copy, I do have a Amazon affiliate link in the description below. It doesn't cost you anything extra, but it does give me some Bezo bucks for sending you their way. And last up, Diaspora is a bingo book, so bring up the bingo board. We're doing pretty good on the bingo board so far, actually. I'm really enjoying it. If you want to check out what the bingo stuff is, I have a video describing exactly what's going on here up there, and I'll link to a playlist in the description below. But long story short, it's a year-long readathon challenge. Each of the squares has a prompt, and you have to fit for them, and there's hard modes as well. This one, Diaspora, was published in 1997, so we hit the published in the 90s square, and the hard mode for that one is that they've published something in the last 5 years, and Greg Egan is still writing today. His latest book, I believe, came out in April of this year. Yeah, in April of this year, so I'm going to check that book out. But yeah, that unlocks the hard mode for this one, so I'm going to lock Diaspora in for the square. Thanks very much for watching, everyone. I'd love to hear if you've read any Greg Egan in the comments, or if you have any other suggestions for these sort of hard sci-fi, maybe high concept sort of things. And let me know in the comments below. If you want to check out my other sci-fi book reviews, you can find the playlist right here. But most of all, just remember to keep reading.